Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Dana Baranovsky, and I'm going to be the moderator today. I am the Growth Marketing Manager here at Elevated Signals. And before we get into it, I want to go into a few housekeeping. So first of all, a recording of this session is going to be available after this webinar. So we'll send it out to your email in a couple of days. And then the next thing I want to mention is that we'll have a Q&A section at the very end of this webinar, so make sure that you keep your questions until the end. If you want to pop them into the Q&A section, so if you look at the bottom panel of your Zoom, you'll see a Q&A section. You can add them in there, and then I'll make sure to monitor them, make sure all your questions are answered. And without further ado, let's get things started. So we've got two great panelists today. We've got Hardeep Shoker and Mike Lattimer. I'll leave it up to you guys to introduce yourselves, but maybe you guys can do an introduction and we can kind of like jump right into the meat and potatoes of things. So Mike, can you kick us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, as well as how you define a KPI and why you think they're important.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Dan. I really appreciate it. Appreciate being invited here to this panel. KPIs are a topic that are close to my heart. I'll tell you why through my background. Currently, I'm an independent consultant. I'm what I would call a recovering cannabis executive, having gone through the rapid slope at Pure Sun Farms of growth from 20 to 200 people, over 200 people, and so now I'm spending my time independent consulting. But as far as a background goes, I actually grew up in the automotive industry. I worked with Honda in Canada and General Motors in Canada on the manufacturing floor. And that's kind of where I was. I didn't know they were KPIs at the time or the structures or balanced scorecard, but it was just part of the culture there. And so that's kind of where I cut my teeth there. After that, I spent 8 years in management consulting, based out of New York City first, and then followed by Toronto. And I worked for companies spanning almost, all kind of industry sectors from tobacco to paper, steel, dollar stores, catalog stores, universities, hospitals. So quite a bit of breadth there. And then I went back into industry. I spent time in IT leadership at Labatt, AB InBev. And then I joined the leadership team at Pure Sun Farms to take it from startup to where it was about a year ago. That's where I left to become an independent consultant. Awesome. KPIs, yeah. Second part of the question. To me, it's answers a simple question of, are you winning, right? Are you on track? Are you on the path to where you need to be? And KPIs should be right from the top of the organization, right to the bottom of the organization. And they should be telling each part of that organization, from the department, from the executive to the department to the individual level, whether they're on track to win. And I think that's how I'd summarize it with a simple answer right now.
I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, I know that like we're gonna be diving deep into all these things, but I kind of want to start at high level. Like, what does KPI stand for? Key performance indicators.
Oh, you want me to say? Yeah, there you go.
I thought you guys were gonna chant in unison.
Yeah.
We should keep that up beforehand, I guess.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Mike, and thanks for being here. I'll pass it to Hardeep.
Yeah, sure. My name is Hardeep, so I'm the COO, one of the co-founders of Elevated Signals. My background is mostly in software, so I didn't really get into the manufacturing space heavily until maybe about 7 years ago. I had a small little slice of time in aerospace as well, making like landing gears and wing assemblies and that kind of stuff. But funny enough, actually, for everybody here, Mike Lattimer is actually one of our earliest partners while we were building Elevated Signals. So this was back at Pure Sun Farms. I think at that time we only had 2 customers, and we went over to Mike and Mandesh at the time and pitched to Mike Elevated Signals, the vision, what we were trying to do. And yeah, I think we were definitely like you were definitely a big part of that success. So I think we're just over 130 manufacturers now. So in that 7 years, so it's been great to kind of take the learnings from you, go implement them, and I'm excited to kind of talk a little bit more about just your expertise. And I think you got a lot to share with the people here. So um, actually, I had a fun one. So Labatt, maybe for the fans, you can share what kind of beer and drinks are produced by that company.
Oh gosh, I mean, well, that is like the Canadian arm of the global beer company, global drinks company, I guess I should say, AB InBev. So in Canada, I would say the most popular beers they produce are like the Budweiser, Bud Light. But then there's a bunch of local breweries that they own as well. For those in the Toronto area, Mill Street Brewery is one of those. Um, Out here in the West Coast, in the Vancouver area, it's Turning Point Breweries, which kind of markets Stanley Park Brewing. And then they actually do all of the Palm Bay kind of ready to drink type thing. So it's all over the map. I think they got 7 breweries across the country and over 40 different locations across the country. Big company.
Yeah, I'm actually curious to get your take on this because obviously we're talking about KPIs. Like you have that wealth of knowledge from like a vast variety of industries. Like with your background. So cannabis has changed quite a lot since 2017 to where it is now. It's like you know back then it was really about the flower, and now it's really about it's almost like a CPG industry at this point. It is one, right? So I'd love to kind of like hear just your thoughts in terms of your work that you're doing in the beverage space and kind of like how cannabis has transformed, and if you're starting to see a lot of overlap and you're starting to
Mm.
see like, oh, I got, this needs to be applied at these companies, right?
Yeah. No, great question. And I actually, to answer that, I'm going to weave in, I think, you mentioned the story about how we engaged you guys to come in and help us. Uh, and that was really, I'm going to back up a bit and say, obviously, I've been at these massive companies like Honda and General Motors, even Labatt, I would say, AB InBev, I should say, where, they're established, very well established, leaders in their industry. They've been operating for hundreds of years, right? So they have the systems, the processes, the data, and the KPIs all in place. And it was just, like I said earlier, it was just part of the culture, right? Um, and so when you're in an established industry, you walk into that stuff. When I walked into Pure Sun Farms with 20 people and we're literally building the place from dirt to a manufacturing facility, we had none of it. So the startup challenge of putting these things in place is massive because it's the whole building the plane while you're flying it thing, right?
Right.
And so, to tell the story of why we engaged you guys, the cannabis industry, for those who aren't in it, operates in a highly regulated space where to release products to the market, you need to make sure the quality people are happy, and the batch record is a key thing there. We were losing batch records. We had, hundreds of batches a month, and we couldn't release them because they were paper binders, and we had a 1 million square foot facility. So we had no KPI. Like we started tracking KPIs on it. We realized that what was happening was binders were getting lost. Like this should have been released a week ago, a month ago. And that's where we engaged you guys and said, we need to digitize this. So there's no such thing as a loss. It's in the cloud. It's in the elevated signals. So we can release things and make money on time. So it was really a driver for us to put in the systems process and the KPIs to start measuring that process
Right.
to have a business result. Yeah.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's super interesting to kind of think of it that way, especially like being in kind of a new industry and comparing that to like a more established industry. How would you compare like larger companies like Toyota that have, the Toyota way? There's like that very well-known um, established KPI framework, in contrast when working with like a smaller manufacturing facility, especially if they're looking to scale. think a lot of our audience is kind of at this stage. They're doing really well, but they know that there are some gaps that are coming up, and they're really trying to scale. So where do you see kind of the gaps in place with those sort of facilities? Do they have KPIs? Are they like supposed to be maybe looking for new KPIs? If you were to go into a facility like that, how would you kind of advise them?
Yeah, maybe I'll use like a practical example with one of my clients, a few of my clients, to be honest. I've seen this in multiple cases in the startup world, right? So obviously the production schedule is important, right? And at a big organization, you've got very well-defined production schedules, very well-defined processes for following that, and then the feedback if it can't be followed, et cetera, right? And it's measured whether people follow that schedule and to what extent people follow that schedule. So, numerous times I've actually seen in startups, and I get it. I mean, I've been directing people to do this. You have the customer who's screaming for product. You have shortages in material. Whatever exception you have, they exist, right? So you try and make the best decision from hour to hour, minute to minute, day to day. But what you're actually doing is kind of eroding your long-term performance, right? So you're going to say, okay, I see that we've scheduled a lot of 1,000, but I only need 40 for this order, so I'm just going to make 40, right? But now you're cutting your lot sizes down, you're increasing your cleaning time, your cleaning cost, and eventually what you do is you erode your customer fulfillment in the long term, right? And you drive your costs up. And so I've seen this in multiple occasions, and I've had to work with clients to actually implement a key performance indicator like production attainment is a basic one to track that. Hey, how did we do today? Did we hit 99% of the schedule or 50% of the schedule? Wow, okay, 50% of the schedule. I think we're probably driving a lot of cost. And so we've implemented changes in these cases, and it's actually turned out really well overall. There's some short-term pain for long-term gain in deploying something like that.
Yeah, that's actually I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Like even for us, like as a startup, this last year, so we've invested quite a bit into basically building out our own framework for KPIs. We've adopted metronomics. It's like for software companies, but the thing that we've kind of really started thinking about is the leading and lagging metrics for these as well. So when you're looking at kind of the production schedule and you're thinking about metrics for whether or not you've got materials available on a specific cadence, right? Like it's like for the production side of things, like what kind of things do you think are leading indicators versus lagging indicators of whether or not you're going to be able to fulfill the orders? And then how do you think that kind of ties into more of like the strategic? Because I have a follow-up question, but I'm just kind of interested on that one first.
Yeah, no, again, great question. So the what I'm finding is the lagging indicator that people are looking at is really the financial results, right? So if they report quarterly, it may be like 4 months before they figure out, are we making money or not, right? And that's kind of the worst case that I've seen out there. Some people close monthly, so it's monthly. And I would actually say like they're not really leading indicators, but some of the ones that you would be tracking day to day, including DIFOT or delivery in full on time. That's a customer metric, obviously. If you're tracking that one and delivering in full on time, obviously at the end of the quarter, you're going to hopefully get to where you need to. So you also have to track your revenue or sales over time, right? So it's a balance of all these things. And then, I think to weave it into what I said before about production scheduling, if you over index on any one of those things. So I was describing a situation where the organization was over indexing or only looking at delivery in full, right? So they would sacrifice productivity and schedule attainment to fulfill a customer order. But as a result, their costs were going up and the company wasn't making money.
Mm, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I like when we were setting up our own KPIs internally and thinking about leading and lagging metrics, that was like definitely, I think like a huge thing about KPIs is like what kind of like the incentivization that you create internally and like how that rolls up to strategy, because I think what you said earlier is like really important. It's like you have the laddering of all these metrics, right? And the laddering of all these metrics needs to be really tied to a specific strategy. And as you go down the ladder, it's like each one of those measurements really needs to kind of be playing a role in reinforcing the strategy. And sometimes I think you can put, you can start at the bottom, put measurements in place, but then it's like completely detached from strategy, right? So like, what kind of do you have any like recommendations, or do you have any kind of like guidance for the people on the call in terms of that?
For sure. And I think this is another one of those interesting, like, established company versus startup dichotomies, where established companies would typically have like a 1-3-5 kind of planning cycle at the highest level, strategy, etc., budgets, all that kind of stuff, which will then drive down into, right? Then they'll say, okay, if we got to produce, I'm just going to use cars, right, or beer, we need to produce X revenue that converts to this revenue in each channel and this many cases of beer or cars or whatever,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So, and then that cascades over to the production organization and the sales organization. So they're on the same page with selling and producing the vehicles or beer or whatever, right? And I think what I've experienced and observed in a startup industry is that things change way faster. The market changes way faster. The regulations change way faster. Everything's just changing way faster. So to put together a one year, 3 year, 5 year plan kind of seems like a waste of time, right? Because who knows what's like 5 years ago in the cannabis industry, people were
yeah,
thinking, everything would be $10 a gram, which it clearly isn't right now, right? Which just would have blown up all those models. So I get that it's hard in a startup because things just move so fast. You're so constrained with resources, but you have to do something, right? You can't just go out there with a plan to just react, because that's what's going to make you unprofitable, right? And I
hmm
think there are some industries that can do that. You look at the Ubers who didn't, what was it, 15 years they didn't produce a positive dollar,
yeah,
something like that, right? So
Yeah, it's
there's
wild.
places where they can kind of do that and just spend crazy. But in manufacturing, I think it's different because you're a startup in often competing against established industries. So you have to come up with a plan, right? Hey, we're gonna
yeah,
we're gonna go out there. We think we're gonna sell X granola bars, so we got to produce X granola bars, right? And if you don't have that, it's another thing I've observed is if you don't have that tie between the overall plan, the sales plan, the production plan. I stepped into one where they were just massively overproducing. And the instruction they've been given is just produce as much as you can. I want to see what this sausage maker will churn out, right? But then you have a pile of sausage that now you have to discount and lose money on and sell, right?
yeah,
So hopefully that kind of answers your question on that one, Hardeep.
yeah. No, it definitely does. What happens when you manufacture to stock way too much? The leading
Uh,
question.
what happens? I mean, consultant answer, it depends. But in some specific cases where you have, um, a date code or a date where the product is no longer viable,
Yeah,
well then the inventory books go way heavy on the inventory assets. But unfortunately, if the entire industry is doing that at once, then the valuation of that inventory comes down, and you have a lot of companies in a lot of trouble. I don't know if you're
yeah.
referring specifically to the cannabis industry, but it sounds like it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was at the beginning. I think everybody's like really focused on not having too much inventory on hand across the board.
For sure.
But I think that definitely is like, it's like it's really important to have like to your point, like the the KPIs in place, but the strategy, like even if it's like a 1 year, it's like, hey, what is my forecast? Like, what am I putting down on my forecast? Like, we have to do this, right? Like, for 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 the upcoming year, we put down, like what we think we're going to do in terms of software sales, and that informs like our spend across all of our different, departments, and that informs kind of like the resource allocation and what we're going to build and everything like that, right? So we almost we kind of treat ourselves as a manufacturing company internally at times. Like, our raw inputs are, obviously we have labor hours, but then we always laugh, it's like the ones and zeros are our inputs. uh But yeah, it's kind of, it's fascinating because like as I've been kind of learning more and more about just, traditional manufacturing, and then kind of overlaying in terms of what we do, it's like everybody has like a forecast, right? You have the forecast that's, kind of informed by a specific strategy that you have that sets your revenue targets. And then based on your revenue targets, you kind of drive that back to execution, um, like the execution to hit those targets, right? um I think this is like, for a lot of people, getting this getting this kind of structure internally, it doesn't come easy, right? Like, this is, for us, for example, it's like years and years of work to get to this point, and we still have a long way to go, right? So how do people speed up this process for themselves? Like, how can they gain this knowledge? Like, how do they make this happen? Because,
Mm.
in manufacturing, it's like you've got a certain amount of capital, you got to make things happen before the money runs out, and there isn't a ton of people just pouring investment dollars into this space, so you have to kind of make every single dollar count in cannabis, right?
Yeah, yeah, and in any cannabis or startup, I would say,
Startup,
I
yep.
think I think my simple answer is to just keep it simple and build it into your culture, right? So what does that mean? Any organization could have thousands of KPIs. I would strongly suggest not to overwhelm the organization, right? Especially in the startup world, you're all wearing like 10 hats. And like I said, things are changing so fast. To have a very complex balanced scorecard type structure a la Honda and, GM and Labatt and et cetera. It's okay to aspire to that, but you're not going to be there until, 20 years from now. So you gotta
Yeah.
figure out what's important to your business strategy, um, and then pick those and build them into your culture and routine. So culture, like I said, when I stepped from university into Honda, like I didn't know I was doing lean. I had studied it in school, but I stepped in there and I just started doing the things that they did. And then it wasn't until after I was like, wait a second, that was lean. So you need people to
Right.
just step into your culture and know, okay, here's my target in the production department. This much production, this much attainment, this first time quality, all these things, because someone's thought through and laddered it up to your production plan. Um,
Hmm.
and I think the other thing is just make sure it ties to your strategy as a company. Let's go back to the Uber example, right? Which I could actually go into the cannabis. So Canopy Growth at some point, I imagine, said, hey, our strategy is to build as many square feet as possible. And that was their KPI. And they did it. They succeeded, right? They probably didn't look at the spending, like the cost or the demand side of things too much. But they succeeded if that was their KPI, to build as many square feet as possible. So it should be tied to your strategy. And it should be super simple and built into your culture. I think that's what I'd say.
Right. Right. I guess like a follow-up question on that, it's like, in terms of manufacturing, like you've worked in a lot of different industries, are there KPIs that you see time and time again that are always relevant?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think there's even like, you look at bodies out there and designations you can get, like, and there's a supply chain operating reference manual and all this, and all the standard ones are there, right? Um, and I think that's a good starting point. Uh, as an example, I mentioned DIFOD, or delivery in full on time, earlier. Super standard across fast-moving consumer goods or CPG industries. Super important. But where you find the difference and where it takes some thinking is in how it's calculated, right? Because each customer of yours may have a different way of measuring your success on that. And really, you want to make sure you're keeping the point of that KPI is to keep your customers happy, right? So you want to understand what they would consider a success in delivery in full on time. For instance, some of them have like, you can deliver it 7 days early and it's still considered that. Some of them are like, you must deliver it in the 2 hours on the day, right? The Walmart kind of thing. They give you
Right.
2 hours and to deliver that thing. And if you miss it, 0% on that score.
Right. I see what you mean. Just like really understanding what that criteria is for you and for your customer. So it's still the same KPI, but like the success, the way that you measure success is very different. I guess I'm curious, like if you were to put yourself in the shoes of a manufacturer, someone that's in this audience, that's looking to set up a robust KPI structure, like what would be kind of the step-by-step process? Like, is that something that they should be doing in-house? Is that something that they should be like reading certain books or like looking at certain resources or potentially hiring someone to help them out with that?
Yeah, I think that's entirely a decision they can make based upon the skill sets and the bandwidth they have in-house. But it certainly can expedite things to get someone externally to help you out if you don't have the bandwidth or the expertise to set it up. But it would kind of look like this. Again, I think we beat this one over the head a bit, but start with a strategy. What's your corporate strategy? What are you trying to achieve? What's your roadmap? Where do you want to be at the end of the year? What are the budgets? What are the sales targets? And then drive it down from there at each level, right? So each executive is going to have targets. And then each executive takes those to the next level, and the next level and the next level to drive up and achieve that, or to monitor as you go through week to week and month to month, whether you're going to get to that goal at the end of the year, quarter, whatever it is. And then number two is to get out with the teams, explain them, and make sure everybody's aligned to them so they get built into that culture. Then you got to create the data sets and the reports, create the routines around it, and then you got to repeat it. Drill into the organization, right? It's gonna, like the first 6 months, I can tell you, having been through it, is a struggle, right? Some managers are gonna pick it up and be reporting on it, but then others aren't. You gotta guide everyone and kind of handhold them into the new culture. As a bonus, you can think about adding it to your, or building your short-term incentive program around these KPIs, your bonus program. Because that helps to actually get people bought into it or aligned to it big time, I've found. And then the other thing to keep in mind is you gotta, because the market changes so fast for a startup, or the realities for a startup change so fast, you gotta build in those executive kind of, okay, let's look at this. Are our metrics still pointing us to where we want to go?
Yeah, makes sense. I think, I mean, for me personally, just speaking about Elevated Signals, we hired a coach, right? Like, I think it's like we're a startup, we're a fast growing startup. Like, we've gone through quite a bit of scale over the years, and as a startup, you're always just trying to keep your head above water in terms of day-to-day activities, and you spend a lot of time in execution, you know and I think that makes it really hard sometimes to take a step back and think about strategy and think about kind of where you're headed. And I think just having an external voice come in once a quarter, or every month, you get a check-in every week, whatever it might be. I think just having a person come in and do that is it's been like extremely beneficial. And I don't think we would have made as much progress on this if we didn't have kind of external help, right? I think that's just kind of like the nature of startups, like what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
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 No, super smart. Super smart that you guys
Yeah.
have done that. And yeah, different eyes see different things, but also you take someone from a different environment, and you guys are so, like you said, you're in the mine, you're digging, right? But someone else
Yeah.
comes and looks and says, hey, what about all these things? Or, you got
Yeah. Yeah.
1,000,
Exactly.
as a startup, you get 1,000 things flying at you every day. You're going to miss most of them, right? You can only
Yeah.
focus on so much. So yeah, no, that's smart. I like it.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
definitely.
then I saw there was a question, and you kind of touched on incentivization as well. So um, maybe just talking about scorecards for a second, and incentivization and structuring scorecards, because I think the incentivization schemes, like I think it kind of like ties
Mm,
into that.
mm.
So
Yeah. So
maybe if you could give some wisdom on that.
yeah, and here's kind of like a couple ideas, I think. Like in the startup world, if you don't want to go through all this effort of building the balanced scorecard top down, all that, you can aspire to it, right? If you've got this month goals or you've got this quarter goals of production or whatever it is, like in the past I've taken the gift card approach, the Amazon card approach, right? Where it's like, hey guys, here's where we need to get by the end of the month. If we get there, everyone's got a $500 Amazon card, right? And so it can be as simple as something like that, or a day off, or whatever you have the ability to do within your organization to to motivate people a little bit extra to hit that target that you need to hit as a leader or manager.
Yeah, should come work for you. $500 gift card sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Hardeep, are you listening?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. One thing that I also wanted to touch on, and I think some people in the Q&A are kind of curious about this too. Um, do you find that it's like really difficult for manufacturers to actually track their KPIs effectively? And in the past, like what sort of strategies or tools have you used to kind of help kind of organize this in a way where it's relevant and up to date?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in manufacturing, yes, I would say, often what you're doing is very technical, very complex, very fast moving, and you have a lot of potential inputs for the data that would output a KPI. Um, so it is hard. I would say it's hard to figure out what you need to be tracking, and then it's hard to get it into a format where you can routinely look at it without a lot of work. Um, so again, let's assume you got the strategy in mind. You've identified, hey, this is a KPI I need to get to. You got to find the data, the right source for it. Is it good? I would encourage you to start small without putting a big program behind it, or like investment. I would start small with like Excel trackers. What we start with on the line typically is like a sheet of paper beside the operator saying, I want every time there's a failure in this part or this machine, I want you to do a tick mark, right? It's kind of the lean approach. And then, daily, we're going to take that sheet and we're going to put it in Excel, right? Now, once you've identified that that's a key KPI that you want to take forward, then that's where you put the weight behind it, right? And often there's PLC systems or modern technologies, MES systems, whatever that you can harvest the data from, and that's where you get the technology professionals involved to build out the KPIs. And often the MES systems and ERP systems for a lot of these KPIs will actually have built-in dashboards, or you can get experts to plug into the APIs, pull them out, put them in your favorite reporting tool. And it's a little bit more Hardeep's world than mine, so maybe he has an opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've got I've as like a tech guy, something that I've been finding interesting is I've tried to put in a lot of instrumentation over the years to measure, certain things within the business. And I think the data collection, data aggregation, that part can be automated, but I still think it should be a person's responsibility to take that number and put it somewhere. And
Yeah.
I'm sure you have an opinion on this as well, but just the fact that they have to look at that number and enter that number somewhere, that is like a person who has visibility on that metric and a responsibility around that metric. And yeah, I don't know if you want to share it because you laughed, so I'm sure you have a thought on it.
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to, it needs to be business driven.
Yeah,
Um, because I think on the tech side, when I was there, the buzzword was data lake, right? Which, within a couple of years, everybody started calling data swamps because everybody had hooked up their MES and PLCs and whatever systems to the data lake, and it was just dumping stuff in there. So now it's all rotting because nobody's using it, right? And that's kind of like, I think what I'm saying is, what are you trying to achieve? What KPI from a minute to minute, second to second, day to day, week to week perspective is going to check that you're on that path of what you're trying to achieve? Okay, now put a metric in. Now invest in the data lake or the data landing method and call the IT guys to figure it out. And before you do it manually. So you can substantiate, yeah, this is an effective measure for our business to be tracking to make sure we're on our way to our goal. Yeah, you don't
yeah,
want to overinvest in data swamps at all.
yeah. Especially if you're a startup and you're trying to scale and
Yeah,
trying to get it going, right? So,
yeah.
um, yeah, I think it's kind of it's interesting because I do like, when you go into a lot of facilities, like you do see people talking about metrics, right? They'll talk about yield, they'll talk about dry down percentages, they'll talk about processing loss, they'll talk about all of these different metrics. But I think just going back again, it's like what I definitely see a lack of is just kind of like that laddering, right? Like everybody has a metric in their mind, and they're all looking at these different metrics. Um, and I think that's like it's the difference between a metric and a KPI, right? Like I think that's kind of the thing that I'm seeing a lot of people struggling with. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, Dana,
Yeah,
I'll
no,
pass it back to you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
fair point, Hardeep. And as a startup, you just don't have the time or the bandwidth to be
Mhm.
managing 15 metrics and not be
Yep.
focusing only on your top three KPIs, right? You need to
Yeah,
identify
yeah.
which metrics are actually driving you to your goals. And then,
That's actually
you can ignore the
super
rest.
important.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. We learned that lesson as well, right? It's like we have so many. It's like you're in software, you can measure everything, right? You can measure clicks, you can heat map the screen and all that kind of stuff. But why? It's like it's also a capital expenditure to do all that effort, and if it's not tying to a result, which is, for most people, like it's revenue at the end of the day, right? It's generating more revenue, generating the revenue more efficiently, right? Like those are kind of two two, I guess,
Well,
strategies that people are trying to really, really focus on, like a
well,
very high level, right?
I
Yeah.
would add from some time in manufacturing that like your working cap stuff is really important too, right? Because there's such, and I think that's a lot of what a lot of people miss is the DIO, the days inventory outstanding, right? How much inventory
Mm,
do you have in your supply chain? I've walked in a lot of places where they're like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna buy, I got to get the best price, so I'm gonna buy 100,000 of these. But you're like, wait a second, how long is that going to last? And they kind of,
yep.
you see the calculations happening. It's going to be like 2 years of inventory. It's like, we don't have like, as a startup, we don't have the cash to put all that money and sit it in a warehouse for 2 years. We need to use it on
Yeah,
useful
yeah.
things, right? So that's how it's starting to look at these numbers, and KPIs like DIO or weeks on hand and all that kind of stuff can help an organization.
It's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think like Dana, you were asking for some practical KPIs to look at. Like I think that one is actually pretty important for a lot of people. Or so yeah. But I'll throw it back to you, Dana.
Thanks. I guess I wanted to ask a question, like kind of high level, maybe just kind of like a before and after question for Mike. Like an example of like someone you've worked with that maybe didn't really know what they were doing in terms of KPI, and then like going in, like helping them set it up, making sure it's kind of established, and like what are some of the outcomes that someone could expect in their business?
Yeah, I mean, I'll use a personal example. I think is the best, and like even with my experience in sophisticated organizations with KPIs, right? And knowing how to do all this stuff, Pure Sun Farms is a startup. Um, it really is an effort of, going back to the first principles of, what are we trying to achieve here, right? And I kind of spoke about the DIFOD example. What we found is each of the customers, and there's a handful of big customers in the industry, actually has a very different way of measuring what they term success and delivery. So what, I think this was a few years into our development, we realized, hey, our customers are creating a lot of noise around our deliveries. We need to dig into this. And that's where we got down, and we understood that our KPIs weren't actually synced with theirs. And so we thought we were doing a good job, but they didn't. And what really matters is what the customer thinks. So we had to redo all our KPIs, and our score that we were saying, hey, we're doing good. We're 98% delivery and full on time, was actually somewhere in the 80s. And the customers had a target for us of 95 plus, different ones. So we switched it, but very quickly we built that into the culture. We already had the routine set up and the culture of reviewing those things and metrics. We had reporting platforms set up to show us that. So really quickly, within a month, you could see them starting to tick up. And within 2 months, we had them back at customer satisfaction levels. And the customers actually acknowledged that we had focused on that and improved that.
That's awesome. So it's truly like small tweaks make a massive difference, and like quite quickly, which is awesome. That's awesome. We have a few questions here in the queue. A lot of them are Elevated specific, but I'm thinking that it might take a little bit of time to answer them. So I'm thinking of jumping in a little bit earlier into these, if you guys are cool with it.
Yeah, sure.
So you guys can take a look at the questions in the Q&A tab here. But the first one is from Ada. Is there a possibility in the future to extract specific data directly into an Excel sheet? Currently, I maintain my own document for tracking departmental metrics and KPIs, but it would be incredibly useful to have the ability to pull that information directly from Elevated.
Yeah, I mean, so you can technically do that already. You can export all of the reports. You can do live polls through Excel. You can do live polls through Google Sheets. Google Sheets, it's a little bit more involved in terms of the setup, but all of the endpoints for our reports, you can actually pull them into Excel, Power BI, pretty efficiently. So that's something that if you're trying to figure out, definitely reach out and we can show you how to do that. And then I think that's also kind of tied to Taylor. Um, Maybe this is something that we maybe do as like a follow-up webinar or something like that, or an office hour, which is maybe show people how to extract information out of elevated signals and trend it. That might be very, very helpful for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. We do have, for those of you who might not know who are customers, we do have office hours as well. So we have Jason, our product lead, who provides demos. So if you ever have questions about how to do certain things, please let us know. We're happy to do an office hour session that's detailed around one of these topics. So thank you so much for all of your questions. I think we covered this other one here around incentive programs for hitting KPIs.
Dana, I can add a little bit more color to that, though, if it's okay.
Sure.
So yeah, I think I gave some examples. I think, how do you create excitement and engagement to those KPIs is the key thing, or those incentives is the key thing, right? So I think it's communication is the key. If you kind of take the model of what we did at Labatt, AB InBev, there was something called an MCRS, a management control and reporting system. They had an acronym for anything, but every month we would basically present as leadership to the entire company. And being a public company, you can't present the actual numbers, but you would kind of do stoplights, right? Of the things that led to the incentive payout, right? So if you're green, hey, we're on track to do a payout at the end of the quarter. right? So I would really encourage communication, frequent communication, and updates to people that they can get excited about, and just put their effort towards achieving those incentives.
That's actually, yeah, I actually, Michael, maybe just to add on to that, because you've mentioned this a couple times. I think the culture aspect, like it's like maybe you can kind of because like not everybody, um I don't know if you've ever experienced this. I've experienced this kind of in my past career experience, but sometimes people just don't like KPIs. They don't like kind of running in that kind of mode. And then some people absolutely love it, right? It just gives them visibility. It gives them an understanding of like what they're working towards. So yeah, from like a cultural perspective at the very top, like how do you kind of set something? Because like I think for a lot of people, it's having this be organization wide is probably going to be something that's like a little bit new, and especially what you said with the stoplights, right? Like we have Dana knows this one. What we have internally is a key function flow map. So we call it, it's a widget, right? So what's our widget is it's accounts, right? And so in our key function flow map, it starts with starts with marketing, then it goes to sales, and then it goes to account management, customer experience, and then it goes to cash in the bank, right? And so those are kind of like our stoplights, and we have various leading and lagging indicators, and we actually present that on a weekly basis to the team, and we look at it almost like on a daily interval at the departmental level to understand, are we on target? Are we going to win or not win this quarter, right? Um, However, I think that like David, Dana, you can share your thoughts on this, but it took us about a year to get this kind of culture really set up, right, internally. And thankfully our team, we didn't face a ton of resistance to this type of kind of way of working. But for organizations where they're starting to introduce this, like how do they communicate this? How do they get this in there? And what should they do if they face resistance to adopting this type of strategy?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, great question. So I think I'm gonna say, like, people want to play for the Yankees, right? They're the winning team. People want to win, right? And often
Yeah.
what you see in a startup world is you see, like, the CEO out there to the public telling a great story about how the startup's going to change the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then inside, you don't have that same excitement, right? So
Right.
how do you, and we're getting kind of like into leadership around KPIs right now, but like, how do you connect that? Like, I want to be part of that team Yankees who's going to do great things to the world, to here's my production metrics that I got to hit this quarter, right? And that's what, like, it sounds like you guys have really started to connect the big picture there. And again, you should aspire to that. I think I gave an example earlier for if the organization's not ready for that, right? So I'm the production leader. Maybe our startup's not quite ready to connect everything and cascade it down and do all that good stuff. Well, I've talked to the CEO or whoever the executive team, and this is, I got to hit this production metric. Well, that's when you kind of deploy the alternate approaches, right? The maybe you don't have a formal bonus program that can be tied to all this, but then you use other incentives to drive the organization and excite them, right? But I think as leadership, it's always our goal to kind of connect the bigger picture values and direction the company's going to like what people do every day, right? At Labatt, I worked in the IT department and the back office organization, and that's really hard, right? It's really hard to do because you got all these marketing people and salespeople out there talking about new products and cool stuff, but we're processing invoices and stuff like that, and so it's hard for them to connect what they do every day to winning. But so you got to do that as a
Yeah.
leader to make the KPIs of what they're doing, processing invoices, tie to the bigger picture of how the whole company wins.
Makes a lot of sense. And I think there's a lot of great culture, and there's a lot of great energy within this industry. And I would say for anybody who maybe um, isn't directly connected with the CEO. But I think in most startups, it's like the CEO executive team is so accessible. Um, and I do think like sometimes you got to manage up, you got to kind of drive that upward as well. Definitely don't wait for it. Uh, right? Like I think that's part of like winning as well, right? That culture of a startup. Most people who join a startup know how volatile and risky startups are, but they're to some degree a little bit of an adrenaline junkie, and that's the environment that they thrive in. So that I would say like in the opposite direction, definitely push forward as well. So yeah,
Yeah, good call.
yeah, yeah. Um, Data, maybe back to questions if you want.
Yeah, we got one more question left from Sean. What is Elevated Signals doing to add financial data to production lots, like cost breakdown, labor, materials, etc.?
Lots of good things. So yeah, Sean, stay tuned. We're actually working on an accounting module. It's not to replace QuickBooks. It's not to replace Sage or anything like that. It's to tie Elevated Signals as a manufacturing platform to your financial tools. So we'll definitely be sharing more of that soon. But it's something that we're pretty excited about. I think this is a, it's like the industry is maturing. We've kind of seen a couple areas that the industry is really lacking in terms of tools. Um, you know, there's I guess like philosophically, we never really considered ourselves a seed to sale tool. Seed to sale was always a byproduct of being able to collect all the data within the organization, right? And so what we're seeing is that the data that we had collected around inventory and quality data points, like that is kind of it's still very, very important. It drives a lot of the things that Michael has been talking about, but there is that whole missing component around demand planning and cost analysis. So those are, I think, areas where we see a lot of organizations struggling, and we definitely have some work that we've been doing towards that area. So um, hopefully that answered that, but we'll definitely connect and share some more information on that soon.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for your questions. That's it for Q&A. So I did have kind of like a wrapping up question just to like tie everything together. Um, but if the audience had to take away like one thing, like remember one thing from this entire conversation, because there's been a lot, what do you think that is? Or if there's something that we have not covered that you would really love to share, this is the time to do it. So, Mike, I'll pass it to you.
Okay, I'm gonna try and mash it all into one sentence, I guess.
Yeah.
Build simple KPIs that are linked to your strategy into your culture.
It's like a mission
That's
statement.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
love it. What about you, Hardeep?
Mine is hire a smart person like Michael to come in and help. Like we have, like I said, it's like we have our own coach, and the coach definitely helped accelerate our adoption and our understanding of our business and tying strategy to KPIs and tying those KPIs to metrics. So I think getting something like that in place is like extremely, extremely important. And if you're a startup, um, you know, you can't do it all, right? You got to get people to come in, help people who have experience from other industries, maybe even see and work with multiple industries simultaneously. Like I think that's it really changes the game as a startup. That would be my piece of advice.
Love it. Those are two great ones. And I guess like my 2 cents, like having experienced the KPI change in our organization is like I love KPIs. Like that's kind of how my brain works. So I just love knowing like what metric I'm working towards. And then, you're always like inundated with requests and ideas and like a startup and things are constantly changing. And if you're always looking at that metric, like, okay, this is not a priority, this is a priority, right? Like what task is going to move me forward to hit those KPIs, to hit those metrics. So that's kind of my 2 cents from all of this as well. But that's time. So thank you so much, you guys. Like that was an awesome conversation. I didn't know I was going to enjoy a conversation around KPIs so much, honestly. And I think I hope the audience really enjoyed it and it was really useful. I think we kind of sparked a discussion around like showing um, our customers like how they can pull data from our system, and potentially we can even talk a little bit about the dashboards that we've also set up for some of our customers in a future session. So that's really awesome. Mike, if people wanted to connect with you or they wanted to reach out to you, where could they reach you?
Yeah, obviously I'm on LinkedIn, so that's an easy way. Or my email is mike@lattimer.ca. Pretty easy to remember.
What about you, Hardeep?
Hardeep at elevatedsignals.com or LinkedIn. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And again, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. We will be sending you a copy of this webinar in the coming days. And if you have any other follow-up questions, feel free to email us at marketing@elevatedsignals.com, and I'll make sure to get back to you. So thank you so much, everybody, and I hope you have a great day. Bye,
Take care. Bye.
everyone.